Before they had anything, she gave them everything. She was the reason they ate, lived, and smiled. She built the empire, while they called her just a woman. But when she fell sick, no one stayed, except one. In the heart of Lagos, behind those tall golden gates, wrapped in silence and roses, lived Madame Emily Odili. Not just a mother, but the matriarch, the woman who built everything they had, from the dust of hardship, with blistered hands and an iron wheel. She had it all. Hotels that gleamed like palaces, lands that stretched like empires, and a company whose name opened doors. But none of that protected her from the ache in her bones, or the questions that haunted her when no one was watching. Who truly loves me beyond what I can give? Not the gifts, not the inheritance, not the luxury, just her. Alone in her room one rainy evening, she stared at a family photo, smiling faces, so familiar, yet so distant. The silence in the house spoke louder than their words. That night, she made a decision. She called in her trusted lawyer, Mr. John, and her quiet, loyal doctor, Dr. Maxwell. They met in the study she once filled with dreams and blueprints. Her voice was softer now, almost trembling. I want to pretend I'm gravely ill. I want to know who still sees me, who still needs me, when I have nothing left to give. Mr. John blinked, then slowly nodded. Then hide your wealth, Ma. I'll open another account and move half your fortune. If they're pretending they won't find it. Emily gave a tired smile, not of joy, but of resolve. Dr. Maxwell added, I'll tell them you have cancer, that it's terminal, 6 months at most. I'll make it convincing. That was how it began. The next morning, the grand mansion felt colder. Emily stayed in bed, coughing softly, refusing food. Her eyes dulled. Her voice faded. Her husband, Williams, the man she once lifted from the gutters to the gala, looked shaken. Their love had been praised for decades. Everyone admired how she raised him from nothing. But now, that same man looked at her differently. Their children, Frank, the proud first son, David, the charming second, Emma, the sharp-tongued daughter, and Olivia, the youngest, with a heart too soft for this world. They gathered quickly when the doctor arrived. Dr. Maxwell examined Emily before them all, then turned with a grave face. It's cancer. I'm sorry. She may not live beyond 6 months. The silence was loud. Olivia burst into tears, holding her mother's hand. Emma gasped, eyes wide, repeating, No, 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 no. Even Frank and David stared, shocked into stillness. William sat slowly, clutching his chest, whispering, not like this. And for a few days, love returned. They brought her food. They whispered kind things. They sat by her bedside, like children again. But pain reveals truth, and time unmasks pretense. Only a week passed, and cracks began to show. William stopped visiting. I can't bear to see her like that, he said. It's too painful. Emma said she had deadlines. I'll check on her later. David suddenly had a business trip. I'll call in when I can. And Frank? Oh, Frank became busy, but not with Emily. One morning, he walked into the study with papers. Mom, he said with a confident smile, I think it's best if I start handling the company. Dad is slowing down and you need to rest. Emily looked at him in silence. The same silence that once protected her from betrayal. She nodded. Inside, she was taking notes. Frank wasted no time. He changed staff, held grand events in her absence, spent money like rainwater, bought a luxury car, took a vacation. He even changed her office, the office she designed by hand. Emily wasn't dead, but her heart, it was quietly breaking, not because they thought she was dying, but because none of them truly stayed. They loved the giver, but not the woman, and now the test was only beginning. While the mansion grew colder in care, the outside world saw no cracks, but inside, greed was growing. Emma, the first daughter, always proud of her looks, began dipping into the household accounts. With one signature, she bought new wigs, imported designer bags, perfumes that cost more than a driver's yearly wage. She'd visit her mother's room for just a moment, snap a photo of the sleeping woman, and vanish. Meanwhile, David, second son, began sending money to a woman he barely knew, a stranger he met online. He called it love, but even love has eyes. And Emily was watching, always watching. Though her hands trembled, though her eyes closed often, she missed nothing. Each cough, each groan was deliberate. Each whisper of weakness, a calculated echo. The only heart that beat for her without condition was Olivia, her lastborn, her softest child. The only one who remembered that the woman in that bed was once a lioness. Olivia fed her with trembling hands. She sang old lullabies at night. She wiped her face, changed her clothes, and lay on the cold floor beside the bed like a servant to a queen. "Mummy, I'll never leave you," she whispered one night, tears dripping onto her mother's hand. "I'll stay until the end." That evening, desperate and hopeful, Olivia approached her father. She stood in the doorway of his home office, where Madam Emily once taught him how to sign his first check. "Daddy," she pleaded, "let's fly Mommy abroad. Maybe they'll find something. Maybe she can survive." But Williams didn't look up. His eyes stayed glued to the papers in front of him. "No, Olivia, that's too expensive. And what if she dies there? Then what? We waste money for nothing?" His voice was cold, practical. Not like a husband, not like a man whose entire life was handed to him by the woman upstairs. Olivia cried again that night, not just for her mother, but for the family that no longer existed. And while the girl wept beside the woman who birthed them all, Frank, her first son, threw a party. "Soon, everything here will be mine." He didn't know. The walls were listening, and so was she. Upstairs, the mansion was too quiet, too still. In the grand master bedroom, once filled with power and perfume, Madam Emily lay wrapped in silence, her breathing shallow, her chest rising slowly beneath soft blankets. Every sound, every laugh below, cut like a blade. She whispered, barely audible, "Olivia, thank you, my daughter." Her lips trembled, her eyes fluttered, but Olivia was there, always, smiling through tears, feeding her warm pup with a spoon so tiny it could barely hold hope, wiping her forehead with a cloth rinsed in prayers. Sometimes, when Emily coughed too hard, Olivia would rub her back gently, holding her in trembling silence, crying only when she turned away. But what none of them knew was that the woman they mourned was still alive inside, watching, waiting. One afternoon, Olivia stepped out to rinse the towel, and Madame Emily turned to face the wall. A tear slid down her face. "Is this how my story ends?" she whispered. "The family I gave everything doesn't even ask if I've eaten. Not even Williams, my husband, the man I lifted from nothing. They're counting my days like I'm already gone." Her voice cracked. "They don't love me. They love the world I built for them." And yet, downstairs, the music continued. Frank had turned a guest suite into a party lounge. Laughter echoed down the marble halls. He poured wine, made jokes, talked of new expansions and shares and takeovers. He didn't call the doctor. He didn't ask for updates. He was already living as if she died. One morning, he walked into the company Emily built with her sweat-stained hands. He wore a custom suit and sunglasses, stood in front of the boardroom like he belonged there. "Good morning," he began confidently. "As you all know, my mother is very sick. She won't return. From today, I am in charge." A few nervous claps, some smiles, some silence. But not everyone agreed. Mr. Deo, the elderly board secretary, slowly stood. His voice was gravel, but steady. "Sir, Madame Emily is still alive. Shouldn't we wait for her words?" The room tensed. Frank's smile faltered. But pride is louder than shame. He waved his hand and said, "She's barely conscious. I'm doing what's best." But outside the boardroom, the storm was quietly gathering, because Madame Emily was not done, and soon the truth would rise. In the boardroom, where her legacy once echoed in every marble tile, chaos had arrived. Frank, now wearing arrogance like a crown, slammed his hand on the conference table. "Are you telling me what to do in my own mother's company?" Miss Linda, one of the long-serving managers, stood, nervous yet brave. "Sir, we only want the company to be safe. Perhaps form a support team until Madam speaks." But Frank turned sharply to the HR manager. "Fire all of them. I don't want to see their faces tomorrow." Within minutes, security guards entered. Chairs scraped. Papers flew. Voices cracked. One by one, staff who had served his mother for decades were escorted out like strangers. Mr. Depot, gray-haired, loyal, trembling with disbelief, spoke quietly as he was led out. "I served your mother like a brother, and this is how you repay it?" "I don't care," Frank snapped. "Get out." The door slammed. Moments later, David burst into the boardroom. He had heard the news. "What is wrong with you, Frank? Why are you acting like Mom is already dead?" Frank leaned back in Madame Emily's CEO chair, like it already belonged to him. "Wake up, David. She has 6 months. I'm just preparing ahead." "You're ruining everything she built," David shouted. "Oh, you think you're smarter because you went abroad?" Frank snarled. David stepped closer. "Stop this madness, or I will." A push, then a punch. Security stormed in, dragging both sons apart like schoolboys. Later that day, Olivia heard of the fight. She sat them both down in the living room. Her voice shook. Her eyes were wet. "Why are you two fighting?" she whispered. "Don't you know Mommy is still alive, still breathing, still watching? Why are you fighting over her money and her company? when what she needs now is love. The room fell silent. Didn't she give us a good life? Didn't she sacrifice everything? So why are we betraying her now? Frank looked at the floor. David said nothing. If anything happens to her, God will not forgive us, Olivia said, and walked away. That evening, as she fed her mother with gentle hands, there was a soft knock. Mr. John, the family lawyer, stepped in quietly. He sat beside the bed and said, "So, your boys fought today." "Frank sacked all your old staff. The company is no longer safe." Madam Emily gave a faint smile. "Let them show their true colors," she whispered. "I'm still watching." But just as Mr. John stood to leave, loud voices floated from downstairs again. Williams and Emma. "I want to sell that land," Emma barked. "Why are we keeping it when Mom is about to die?" "Let her die first," Williams muttered coldly. "Then we'll sell." Upstairs, Emily heard it all. Her heartbeat quickened. Not from sickness, but from sorrow. The pain wasn't in her bones anymore. It was in her spirit. The husband she lifted from the streets now waited for her to die. The daughter she raised with silken love now saw her as a barrier to land. That night, Olivia came in with a tray of warm pap. "Mummy, please eat something." Madam Emily stared at her with tired eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Olivia. You're the only one who stayed." Tears rolled down Olivia's cheeks as she sat beside her. "If anything happens to you, Mummy, I won't forgive myself." She took her mother's hand. Silence sat beside them. But outside that room, a storm was brewing. Frank had called for another company meeting. "I have a new idea," he said. "We'll launch a luxury fashion brand. Clothes, bags, perfumes. It'll be massive." A worker hesitated and raised his hand. "Sir, we don't have that kind of money." Frank laughed. "Then borrow." "I said, do it. It's still my mother's company." When David heard about the risky plan, he was furious. He left the office, heart pounding, and drove straight home. He entered Madame Emily's room where Olivia was feeding her. "Olivia, give us a minute." "No," she replied calmly. "Whatever you want to say it here." David sighed, turned to their mother. "Mom, Frank is ruining everything." Emily opened her eyes slowly, looked at David, then turned her face to the wall. Not a word, because she was still pretending, still watching, still silent. Days passed. And Madame Emily remained in that quiet room, always weak, always coughing, always still. Only Olivia remained by her side, cleaning her body, telling her stories, wiping her tears. But outside that door, everything was unraveling. One morning, David sat on the balcony, fists clenched. "Frank thinks he can destroy everything she built. I won't let it happen." The next day, he dressed in a crisp suit and drove to the city, straight to one of his mother's greatest achievements, Sunray Grand Hotel. The manager, Mr. Felix, rose quickly from his desk. "Good afternoon, sir. I came to tell you, the hotel is for sale," David said. "What?" Mr. Felix gasped. "Sir, with due respect, this is one of the best hotels your mother built. She loved this place. Please don't sell it." David's tone turned icy. "Are you questioning me in my own mother's property? If you try that again, I'll fire you." Mr. Felix bowed his head, but his heart was uneasy. As soon as David left, he called Mr. John. "Sir, David wants to sell the hotel. It doesn't feel right. Mr. John sighed. Don't worry, I'll handle it. He did. He sent trusted men to act like buyers, strangers with quiet hands. When David signed the hotel away, they handed the papers straight to Mr. John. He locked them in a private safe. The hotel still belonged to Madame Emily. David didn't stop. He sold one of the most valuable plots of land his mother had kept untouched. But again, the land ended up in Mr. John's hands, and David thought he had won. 3 days later, Emma found out. She stormed into the living room where David sat, relaxed, watching television. David, you sold Mom's hotel and the land? Are you mad? David turned. Emma, don't shout. I'm not a child. You idiot, she screamed and slapped him across the face. That land was meant for me. David slapped her back. They dragged at each other like wild animals, shouting, wrestling, crashing into chairs. A flower vase fell. Glass shattered. One of the maids rushed to Olivia. Miss Olivia, please come. Your brother and sister are fighting. She ran in. What is wrong with you two? She screamed. Why are you dragging our mother's property when she's still alive? David shouted. Is she really alive? Look at her, lying there like a corpse every day. Olivia's voice cracked. She gave us everything, and this is how you repay her? Fighting, selling, betraying her. Emma stormed out. David slammed the door behind him. 2 days later, Williams, the man Emily once called her king, stepped into her room with disgust on his face. This room stinks like death, he said coldly. I can't breathe in here. Emily coughed quietly, looked away. You're only sick, not dead. Clean yourself. Open the windows. Then he clapped twice. Driver, security. Olivia ran in. Daddy, what's happening? She'll sleep in the guest room from now on, Williams barked. Even hospitals don't smell this bad. But this is my mother's room. Shut up, he snapped. I'm still her husband. I decide in this house. When the guards entered, Williams ordered, Carry her. No, Olivia shouted. Don't touch my mother. She stood in front of the bed, trembling. But the guards moved closer, uncertain. And Emily still said nothing, still pretended to be too weak to move, still watching. Sometimes the greatest sickness is what lives in the hearts of those closest to you. As the guards gently lifted Madame Emily from her bed, her eyes drifted around the room, lingering on each corner like silent goodbyes. But her pain wasn't from the illness she pretended to have. It was from something deeper, the wounds carved by her own family. Weeks passed, and what once stood as a fortress of pride, the Odili Empire, began to crumble like dry bread. Frank's reckless spending, his shallow decisions, began to bleed the company dry. The accounts were emptying, profits plummeting. Loyal clients, ones Emily spent decades nurturing, began to walk away in silence. The murmurs in the corridors grew louder. Bills were piling up. Suppliers demanded payment before delivery. Even the grand fashion line Frank launched with so much noise became a joke. The clothes were overpriced, the designs unimpressive. No one was buying. The billboard outside their flagship store stood tall, but behind it was failure. In his office, Frank sat alone, sweating, anxious. Where do I find money now? He whispered. If this company goes down, I'm finished. And then a wicked idea slithered into his mind. I'll sell the Sunray Grand Hotel, the golden crown of Madame Emily's empire, the one she called her golden house, built from her sweat, shaped by her vision. That evening, Frank called for a family meeting. Everyone gathered in the sitting room. Upstairs, in the quiet guest room, Madame Emily lay as usual, coughing gently, her eyes closed. Frank stood tall, masking desperation behind false leadership. "The company is in crisis," he began. "We must act now. I have decided we'll sell the Sunray Grand Hotel and inject the funds back in." But before he could finish, Emma leapt up. "Which Sunray Grand Hotel?" "The one David already sold?" The room froze. Frank's head snapped around. What did you just say?" Emma folded her arms. "You heard me. Ask your brother." David stood up slowly. William's eyes widened in disbelief. "David, is this true? You sold the hotel without telling me? Your father?" David's face hardened. "Daddy, don't raise your voice. Did you ask Frank about the millions he wasted on parties and his nonsense fashion dreams?" Frank jumped up and grabbed David's shirt. "You thief! You sold Mommy's hotel and kept the money." David pushed him back. "Don't touch me. I won't fold my arms and let you destroy our mother's empire, chasing women and throwing money around like confetti." The fight exploded. Chairs fell. Glass shattered. William shouted. Maids fled the house. Emma screamed, "You both are mad. You want to kill each other." And then Olivia ran in, crying, shaking. "Why is there no peace in this house? Why? Our mother is upstairs, sick, weak, and you're here, tearing each other apart like animals." The room fell silent again. "Why are we treating Mummy like she's already dead? Is this the legacy she built? For all of you to destroy it like this?" No one answered. That night, as Olivia finished wiping her mother's forehead, Mr. John, the family lawyer, entered quietly. He sat beside the bed. "Ma, I need to tell you something." Emily opened her eyes, just barely. "It's about David," he said. "He sold the Sunray Grand Hotel and One Lodge land. But I stopped it. I used trusted people to buy them back. The documents are safe." A tear rolled down Emily's cheek. "Thank you," she whispered weakly. "They're tearing each other apart," Mr. John added. "But I won't let them destroy everything you built." She closed her eyes and sighed, her thoughts loud beneath the silence. Is this what I raised them for? To fight over things while I'm still breathing? But Frank wasn't done. The next day, in the living room, he stood before everyone, his hand gripped tightly around David's shirt again. "Bring the hotel money," he shouted. "We need it to save the company." David pulled away. "For what? So you can throw another party or fly some girl to Paris again?" "I'm not giving you a single kobo." Frank rushed at him, but Olivia jumped between them. "Stop it! What is wrong with you? Mummy is upstairs, sick and dying, and all you care about is money?" David shook his head, snatched his car keys, and stormed out. Frank turned to their father. "Daddy, you heard him. He sold Mother's hotel and won't return the money." Williams didn't flinch. "Leave him. He's stubborn. If he won't bring the money, then sell something else." Frank frowned. "Sell what?" Williams waved lazily. "Sell your mother's white SUV." At that moment, Olivia returned with a bowl of warm water in her hands. She froze. "Father, what did you just say?" Williams turned. "You heard me. Sell that car. We need the money." Tears welled in her eyes. That's Mummy's favorite car. And you want to sell it while she's still alive. William stood up. Don't you understand? The company needs help before everything crashes. But Olivia didn't move. Then tell Frank to bring back the old workers he sacked. They know this company. They can help fix it. Frank scoffed. Never. They were rude and useless. They were loyal, Olivia snapped. Loyal to Mother. And if she trusted them, then so do I. 2 days later, the gates of the mansion creaked open. 3 cars rolled in. From them stepped Madame Emily's extended family. Her younger brother, 2 cousins, and a respected elder from the village. They held baskets of fruit and bottles of wine. We heard our sister is not well, the younger brother said gently. We came to see her. It's been too long. But before they could reach the front door, William stormed out, his wrapper flailing, eyes blazing. What are you doing here? Who invited you? The elder stepped forward calmly. Chief, we only came to pray with her. Pray? Pray for who? When she was strong and rich, you never came. Now she's sick and you crawl out like vultures? The cousins looked down, ashamed. We didn't mean any harm. Williams clapped his hands loudly. Go back to your village. There's no space here. We don't need fake love. Leave before I call security. But please, at least let us greet her. I said leave. His voice thundered through the compound. And just like that, the gate closed again. Even those who came with love were shut out. And upstairs, Madame Emily lay still, listening and learning, because the silence was louder than their words. One of the guards at the gate quickly stepped aside, opening it just wide enough for the guests to leave. Without another word, Madame Emily's extended family quietly returned to their cars and drove away. From a window upstairs, Olivia had seen it all. She turned from the glass, slowly, and looked at her mother lying still on the bed. A tear slipped down Emily's wrinkled cheek, not from pain, but from the slow death of dignity. The house was quiet again that evening, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that holds tension, like a loaded gun. Then footsteps, heavy, fast. David stormed into the sitting room, his shirt wrinkled, his chest heaving with anger. Papa, he barked. Where is Papa? Williams appeared from the kitchen, casually sipping orange juice. Why are you shouting like a madman? David pointed, furious. Why did you give Frank permission to sell one of Mum's houses and her car? Williams rolled his eyes. Must you shout every time you speak? We need money. Or do you want people laughing at us? David stepped closer. Papa, listen to me. With the way Frank is running things, even if we sell 10 houses, this company will still crash. Williams frowned. That's your elder brother you're talking about. Show some respect. Respect? David's voice cracked. He doesn't deserve it. He fired every loyal staff Mom trained, replaced them with his foolish friends, and now acts like he owns the company, like Mom is already dead. Williams shouted back, and you were told to return the hotel money and you refused. David threw his hands in the air. Because I won't fund recklessness. If you keep allowing Frank, he will sell everything Mum worked for, and we'll still have nothing. The room went quiet. Then David said calmly, You know what? Let's end all of this. Call Mr. John. Let him come read Mum's will. Let everyone get what belongs to them. That way, no one touches what isn't theirs. Williams was silent, then slowly nodded. Fine. First thing tomorrow. The next morning by 10 a.m., the living room was full. Emma sat on one side, scrolling through her phone like nothing mattered. Frank lounged in a chair, legs crossed, smirking with arrogance. David sat upright, arms folded. Olivia sat quietly in the corner, eyes filled with worry. Williams sat like a king, pretending to control a kingdom that was burning. The door opened. Mr. John stepped in, holding a leather folder. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "I was told you called for the reading of Madame Emily's will." "Yes," David answered. "We want to know what belongs to each of us before it's all destroyed." Mr. John cleared his throat, opened the folder slowly, and looked around the room. "Unfortunately, your mother has not written any will yet." "What?" Emma shouted, springing up. Mr. John nodded calmly. She planned to. She even booked an appointment with me. But she became too weak before we could meet." Frank stood, fuming. "So you mean there's no will? Nothing at all?" Mr. John raised a finger. "And even if there was, it wouldn't be read while she's still alive. The law is clear." Williams blinked, confused. "So what now?" Mr. John looked each of them in the eye. "Now, you take care of your mother. She is still alive, so stop the fighting, stop the selling, stop tearing the family apart." There was silence. Olivia nodded gently, tears forming again. Frank hissed under his breath. David rubbed his forehead. Emma rolled her eyes. And upstairs, in the dim guest room, Madame Emily heard it all. Through the tiny crack in the door, Olivia always forgot to close. She coughed softly, and a sad smile touched her lips. "They've shown me who they truly are." 1 week passed, but the mansion was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. No joy, no laughter, just quiet footsteps and eyes that no longer trusted. But while the house mourned, Williams had other plans. That afternoon, dressed in his finest lace akbada, gold watch gleaming, he drove out of the compound and headed to the estate of his old friend, Kunle, a wealthy man with a loud mouth and a history of womanizing. They shook hands like schoolboys at the gate. "Ah, Williams," Kunle grinned. "I heard your wife is very sick. I hope she survives." Williams sipped from the wine glass Kunle handed him and sighed heavily. "Doctor said it's cancer. Honestly, I feel like I'm already a widower." Kunle leaned forward. "How are you coping?" Williams folded his arms. "Coping with what? I'm not just sad. I'm lonely. She just coughs all day. There's no life in that room anymore." Kunle smiled slyly. "Which means she can't satisfy you." Williams lowered his voice. "That part I've been thinking about." Kunle laughed. "You're still young, my friend, and handsome. You don't need to suffer because of a sick old woman. If I were you, I'd find a young sweet girl. Someone soft, who'll treat you like a king." Williams nodded slowly. And 2 days later, he met Tina, a charming beauty in her early 20s. She worked as a bartender in a lounge he frequented. Their eyes met. They exchanged numbers. And soon, they began meeting in quiet hotel rooms across the city. Tina massaged his ego, praised his smile, rubbed his feet like royalty. "I don't know how I lived before you," Williams whispered one night. "You deserve love, my king," she cooed. "Let me take care of you." They kissed. And from that day, Williams abandoned his sick wife completely. No visits, no check-ins, no meals. Everything was left to Olivia. While Emily lay upstairs, coughing and fading, Williams was drowning in perfume, lipstick, and champagne. But it didn't stop there. One morning, he shocked everyone. As the family sat in the living room, tired and tense, Williams walked in, smiling like a boy in love. Behind him was Tina, dressed neatly, holding a small leather bag. "Everyone, meet Miss Tina." He beamed. "She's our new personal driver." Emma looked up sharply. "Dad, I thought we already had a driver." Williams waved it off. "Yes, but Tina will be my personal driver. She takes me where I want, when I want." Frank raised an eyebrow. David muttered under his breath. More like personal toy. But Williams didn't care. He clapped his hands once. "Housekeeper, give Tina a room in the boys' quarters. She starts today." "Any problem?" No one answered. But beneath the silence, tension choked the house like smoke. And upstairs, Madame Emily lay still, but her ears were listening, and her heart was breaking again. Not asleep, not unconscious, just broken. Her ears still remembered every word. Her heart still carried the weight of betrayals. But in that same night, a new storm entered her house. The air was heavy, thick with something unspoken. Olivia couldn't sleep. She wandered into the kitchen, hoping to find her father. But the room was empty. As she turned back toward the hallway, a strange sound caught her attention. Soft whispers, distant giggles, coming from the back, from the boys' quarters. Barefoot, heart racing, she crept through the shadows. The sounds grew clearer. Then came a soft moan. Her blood ran cold. She pushed the small door open, just slightly, and froze. There, under the dim bulb, was her father, sitting on Tina's lap. Both of them half-dressed, laughing like teenagers in secret sin. "Papa!" Williams jumped to his feet. Tina scrambled, fumbling with her blouse. "Olivia!" he began, but she had already stepped inside, voice trembling. "Father, what is this? This is the driver you brought home? This is what you've been doing while Mommy lies helpless in that room?" Tina stammered. I was just... "Get out!" Olivia screamed. "Leave this house now!" Tina ran. One shoe flew left, her shirt halfway buttoned. Williams tried to explain. "What do you expect me to do, Olivia? I'm lonely. Your mother's dying. She doesn't even speak to me anymore." Olivia's voice cracked. "She's still alive, Father. And you abandoned her like she's already gone. She gave you everything, and you repaid her. With this?" Williams pointed a shaky finger. "Don't you dare tell anyone what you saw, not even your brothers." Olivia didn't answer. She just turned away, shaking, angry, betrayed. The next morning, as soft sunlight filtered through the guest room window, Olivia sat by her mother's side. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "There's no reason to keep her here anymore. No one cares. Maybe, just maybe, the village can help." That day, she packed a small bag, made quiet arrangements with the mansion's trusted driver. And by sunset, Madame Emily was gone. Taken far from the mansion, far from the lies, back to the village where her story first began. As word spread that Madame Emily had returned, sick and fragile, people came running. Uncles, aunties, elders, cousins. Even villagers she hadn't seen in years. Some brought yams, others brought palm wine. One woman came with herbs wrapped in old cloth. They sat around the compound, heads bowed. She gave me money to start my farm. She built our community school. She never forgot us, even when she became rich. Tears flowed, and love returned. A quiet elder woman said, "There's one herbalist, powerful. His medicine is stronger than hospital drugs. Let's call him. We must not lose her like this." Olivia stood in the doorway, stunned. So many people love my mother, she thought. And yet, in her own house, she was nothing. The next day, the herbalist arrived. A tall man, dark-skinned, with white chalk markings across his face and a leather satchel of roots and bottles. He entered the small room, looked at Emily, then turned to Olivia. "Let me speak with her. Alone." Olivia nodded and stepped out. Inside, the herbalist sat beside her bed, his voice low, respectful. "I see strength in your eyes, madam. You are not as weak as they say." Emily opened her eyes slowly. "Because I am not sick," she whispered. The herbalist sat up sharply. "What?" "I don't have cancer," she said, her voice thin but clear. It was all a plan, a test. Only my lawyer and my doctor know. I needed to know who truly loves me. Who would stay if I had nothing? The herbalist was quiet. Then slowly, he smiled. "You are a wise woman, madam. You used death to see life clearly." Emily nodded. "And what I saw broke me." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone. You have one child who truly loves you. Olivia is the light in your darkness." Emily closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Outside, Olivia paced the courtyard, wringing her hands, her eyes on the herbalist's bag. "Please, let it be good news," she whispered. Moments later, the herbalist stepped out. Olivia rushed forward. "How is she? Is she okay?" He gave a warm smile. "Your mother is stronger than you think." "You mean the herbs are working?" she asked hopefully. The man chuckled softly. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Your love is already healing her." Confused, but comforted, Olivia nodded. "Thank you." Frank roamed the hallway like a trapped lion, his shirt half buttoned, eyes bloodshot. He flipped through folders and bank reports. The company is dying. No money is coming in. Investors are pulling out. He stormed into the living room where Williams and Emma were watching TV. "Papa, Emma, if we don't act fast, the company will shut down." Emma added, bored. "Why don't you sell your own car this time?" Frank's eyes flared. "Don't be stupid." David walked in from outside and heard everything. He laughed bitterly. "Maybe sell the house you party in." Frank jumped up. "At least I'm trying to save the company. You just sit around." David stepped forward. "Save it? You're the one who ruined it. From the day you touched that office, everything crumbled." "You're just jealous because I'm the first son," Frank yelled. "Jealous?" David snapped. "You're mad." They rushed at each other again. Emma screamed, "Stop it! You fools! You'll bring down the roof." William stood up slowly and walked away. His face was tired. But the storm was just beginning. For the first time in many weeks, Madame Emily walked outside, not pretending, just tired. Tired from heartbreak, tired from everything. Olivia held her arm gently as she took small steps toward the wooden chair in the yard. Villagers clapped. Madame is getting better. Thank God. An elder leaned toward Olivia and whispered, Your mother's spirit is strong. Take care of her, and she will live long. Olivia smiled, though her eyes were misty. Thank you, sir. That night, Madame Emily sat under the stars, wrapped in thick cloth, the air cool and clean. She looked around at the quiet village compound, the smell of firewood, the chirp of crickets, and something else. Peace, the kind she hadn't felt in years. She closed her eyes gently and whispered, Maybe this is the beginning of something new. That evening, the sky glowed orange as the sun kissed the horizon behind the palm trees. The breeze whispered gently through the compound, and under the old mango tree, Madame Emily sat in silence. Her eyes rested on the dusty ground, peaceful but weary. Olivia walked out with a steaming bowl of yam porridge, her heart still heavy. Mama, please eat something, she said gently. You haven't eaten all day. Emily looked up at her. There was a calm in her eyes now, a deep, quiet strength. Sit down, my daughter, she said softly. There's something you must know. Olivia blinked. What is it, Mama? Emily took her hand, gently, firmly, and then the truth poured out. Everything you saw, the sickness, the doctor's report, the coughing, the weakness. She paused. It was all a test. I was never sick. I don't have cancer. Olivia gasped. Mama, what? I pretended, Emily said, her voice steady, because I needed to see the heart of this family. To know who truly loved me when I could no longer give, when I could no longer stand. I wanted to see who would wipe my tears and who would fight over my treasures. Olivia sat frozen. Her lips trembled. So, all this time, Emily nodded slowly. Tears shimmered in her eyes. You were the only one who stood by me. You bathed me. You fed me. You carried me like a baby and brought me to this village, hoping to find a cure. But I wasn't sick. I was watching. And you, Olivia, you made me proud. Olivia covered her mouth in shock. No words, just tears. Later that night, under the wide branches of the big tree, Madame Emily stood tall. For the first time in weeks, without help, her voice rang out strong. My people, I have something to confess. The elders, cousins, villagers all turned in surprise. I was never sick. I never had cancer. Gasps. Silence. It was a plan, a test. I needed to know who loved me and who loved only what I could give. She turned to them all. But you showed me what true love looks like. You gave. You prayed. You stayed. Her voice softened. Especially you, Olivia. You stood by me when even those I raised with my own hands walked away. Applause erupted. An elder stood. Madam, you've taught us wisdom. This world is full of pretenders. You are truly blessed. A woman added, Your daughter is a gift. May God bless her more. And for the first time in many weeks, Madame Emily smiled. Next morning, back in the city mansion, the car rolled into the compound. Gates swung open, and the guards froze in shock. Madam? She stepped out, not coughing, not limping, not weak. She stood tall, alive, and beside her, Olivia, holding her bag. Let's go in, Mummy. It's time. Inside the house, Emma lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She heard the door creak, turned lazily, then froze. Her phone dropped. Mummy? She ran forward. You're walking. You're okay. You're not coughing. She hugged her, trembling. David came down the stairs, headphones dangling. He stopped, eyes wide. "Mummy." Behind him, Frank emerged with a bottle of wine. It slipped from his fingers and shattered. You're fine." From the kitchen, Williams's voice rang out. Who broke something again? He entered and froze. The glass in his hand almost slipped. "Darling," he whispered. "You're strong, you're walking." Olivia stepped forward, calm and composed. "Welcome home, Mummy." Madam Emily gave a quiet nod and walked past them all, straight into her master bedroom without a word. The house fell silent, like a funeral. Emma grabbed Olivia's hand. How did this happen? What did you do?" David stuttered. "The doctor said it was late-stage cancer." Frank scratched his head. This has to be a miracle." Williams whispered, "It's like I'm dreaming." Olivia looked at all of them. "I didn't perform a miracle. I gave our mother what none of you could. Love, peace, and care." She turned and walked upstairs. "If you have more questions, ask her yourselves." That night, in the quiet of her room, Madam Emily opened a drawer beside her bed. Inside was a small black object, a hidden CCTV camera. She pulled out 2 more from a secret box under the bed, connected them, and there it was. Footage, clear, unforgiving. Every moment they thought she was too weak to see. She recorded it all. She took a breath and dialed. "Hello, Mr. John. Come to the house tomorrow. Bring every document I gave you." "It's time." David sat with his head bowed. Emma chewed her nails nervously. Frank clenched his fists. William stood in a corner, his arms folded, face pale. Mr. John sat calmly, a brown folder in his hand. And then Madam Emily entered, strong, bold, unapologetically alive. She stood in the center of the room like the lioness she was. "Mr. John already knows the truth. Now, it's time I tell all of you." They looked up, breath held. "I was never sick. It was all a test of love and loyalty. And you showed me who you truly are." She turned to Frank. "You destroyed my company. You sacked loyal staff, spent the funds on parties, replaced value with vanity. You sold my house, my SUV, your inheritance. You already spent it." Frank sobbed. "Mommy, please, leave my company. You are no longer welcome." She turned to David. "You sold my biggest hotel, one of my most treasured lands. And why? Because you never worked to build them. You never understood sacrifice. Those were meant to be yours. Now they are gone. So are your rights. Find a new path." David dropped to his knees, weeping. "Mother, please." She looked at Emma. "You wanted to sell my land. You couldn't, only because you didn't have the documents. From today, you get nothing. If you want anything, earn it with action, not words." Emma broke into tears. And then she faced Williams. "You, after everything I gave you, you repaid me with betrayal. You brought another woman into my house while I lay pretending to be helpless." William stammered, "Darling, please, I am not your darling. You have 24 hours to leave my house. Security will escort you peacefully, but permanently." Williams collapsed in a heap, begging, but it was too late. She turned to Mr. John. "Everything I have left, my estates, houses, businesses, now belong to Olivia." Gasps filled the room. Emma's mouth fell open. Frank swayed in shock. David buried his face in his palms. Emily continued. Olivia, the one you called not really family, she's the only one who treated me like family. The one I didn't give birth to became the only one who truly loved me. From this day forward, she is the new CEO and the heir to everything I built. Mr. John smiled. Already in progress, Ma. The old loyal workers are on their way back. 1 year later, the company had risen again, stronger, wiser. Olivia led with grace, with discipline, with heart. Profits doubled, new branches opened, awards poured in. The old workers returned, calling her Madam Olivia the Wise. In the corner office, Madam Emily watched her daughter lead. Her eyes glistened with pride. David and Frank found jobs elsewhere. Emma tried, day after day, to prove she had changed. Williams? No one heard from him again. But Olivia stood tall. Because when the fire came, she did not run. She stayed. And in the end, she was the only one who passed the test. True love doesn't wait for the will. It shows up when there's nothing left to give. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay blessed.